Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is FaithWorks on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for FaithWorks, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. Amazing people who have an interesting, sometimes overlooked impact on our Catholic faith. On FaithWorks, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. Our guest today, as always, is Rob Agnelli. Welcome to Saints in the Making, episode number 10, where we will explore the lives of holy men and women who continue to inspire us on our journey of faith. Today, we're turning our attention to three incredibly powerful witnesses in the life of the church, all of whom we celebrate in October. We'll reflect on St. Faustina Kowalska, the apostle of divine mercy, St. John Henry Newman, the brilliant convert and theologian, and St. John Paul the Great, whose papacy shaped a generation. We'll look at who they were, what they taught us, and how their examples can guide us. Saints in the making today. Let's begin with the life of St. Faustina, Rob. What can we start with St. Faustina? There's so much to uncover.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty fitting on Divine Mercy Radio that we start with her. I think one of the things that, if you look at the sort of the workings of Providence, the three greatest saints of the 20th century all came from Poland, right? And I mean, it's, Maximilian Kolbe, John Paul II, and St. Faustina. And it's hard to argue that there wasn't a people that suffered more than the Polish people, right? Like, essentially, the saying is they lost World War II twice, right? And what I think it sort of points to providentially is the power of the cross, right? So the power of the cross is not just restricted to Calvary 2,000 years ago, but God is continually, raising up these saints who make up for what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ, right? By willingly uniting themselves to Christ's sufferings, and ultimately, in the case of both John Paul II and Saint Faustina, changing not just the church but the world. And you think about how many souls have been saved because of the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And it was all because Faustina was willing to give herself completely and totally to Christ.
I never make the assumption that with anything that we're talking about on Divine Mercy Radio that our listeners understand what we're talking about. And I think that there can be a tendency to that when we go deeper into our faith, that everybody is kind of at the same level that you are. And I know that with the Divine Mercy image, we see it so much. And when I was really on my journey of reversion back into the church, it's when her diary, Divine Mercy in My Soul, I think is the title. And now it's known as a spiritual classic. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's a spiritual classic. And that started, how many years ago? So it had a profound impact on my own faith journey. So let's start with St. Faustina, gain an understanding of her own spiritual journey into, becoming a religious, and how she encountered Christ, and then this image of divine mercy, Jesus, I trust in you, was created.
So she was born 1905 to a pious farming family in Poland, which at the time, that part of Poland was under Russian control. Again, part of like the suffering of the Polish people. She was clearly pretty religious from a young age. In the diary, I believe she talks about a dream she had of Mary leading her through a garden when she was 4 years old.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. Okay. So she, very early on developed this sort of spiritual sensitivity to these movements in her soul and voices in her heart. And then our Lord visited her when she was 7 and sort of gave her her call, her vocation. And she says, I was given the grace of a vocation to the religious life. And so that sort of call just kind of remained and echoing in her heart. So she set out to sort of figure out how to make that work. So she left her family, and the thing that often would happen to her, because she had, I guess you would best describe it like a holy impatience, where she would get this call and, like God does with most of us, doesn't give a whole lot of the details, but she wasn't really willing to.
I got to stop you right there. I've never heard that expression before. Holy impatience. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all sort of have that, hopefully, where we want to do what God's asking, but God leaves out a lot of the details because it's just not time yet. Mm-hmm. And, in her case, and, I guess you could also call it zeal. But in her case, so she sort of wants to take the bull by the horns and set out and figure out how to do these things. And so she's kind of roaming around a little bit, doesn't know, okay, she has this call to enter a convent. She has no idea what convent she's supposed to enter. And
how many were around the area where
she was? A lot. I mean,
okay.
But she enters the first one she goes to, which is the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy. But they won't take her because she doesn't have a dowry. She can't even afford the garments and everything she needs. And so she goes and works as a maid until she gets the money. And so she's, it's like, what do they call it with the, where you keep making deposits like in a store? She keeps bringing her money there, leaving it there, bringing her money there, leaving it there. And then, then she's like.
Not like a layaway.
Yeah, like a layaway. Yeah. She's like a layaway vocation, right?
That's awesome.
So she.
Another one.
Yeah. So she essentially keeps giving them the money she's making.
So funny.
Until she has enough. And then they sort of take her. And she really actually doesn't even know that much about their vocation. Because she's looking for a truly deeply contemplative vocation, and she ends up in this sort of active, order
with the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So she's about 20 when she enters.
How old was she when she started this? And
probably 17 was when she left home.
Okay.
And went and got a job.
Wow.
And just the beauty of, like, initially she goes and gets a job because, between her and her sisters, there's like one dress, and they can't all go to mass at the same time.
Wow!
And so she goes to make money so she can buy a dress so they can all go to mass. So just the simplicity but generosity of wanting just simply to go to mass, so she goes and gets a job.
And so she's eventually welcomed into the order at 20. Talk a little bit about that experience there and how these visits with Christ and the Blessed Mother, correct?
Yeah. So this, that initial sort of, when she was 5 or 4 and then 7, those continued.
Okay.
And in that, there's one where, at a certain point, she kind of had given up when she was, I think, maybe 16 or 17. And she goes to a dance with her sister. And she ends up dancing with the wounded Christ, and that sort of solidifies her in her, in her vocation. But so I think it's in 1931 is when Christ starts to begin to talk to her about the divine mercy, especially the image. So
how far into her religious vocation?
Yeah, so she had been there probably for 8 years, maybe 8 or 9 years at this point. So he appears to her, and he appears to her exactly, he appears to her as we sort of see in the image, and he tells her to paint it. And she's like, I don't know how to paint. And so, she is like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So she borrows first she borrows paintbrushes, then she borrows like charcoal, and she can't do it. And so this again creates that sort of that anxiety in her that Christ is asking her to do something, and she has no idea how to do it. And so there's a wall. She talks about this again in her diary. There's a wall in the convent that has nothing on it, and so she again sort of gets discouraged, puts it down, and it's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. But there's this empty wall like right outside her room that she walks past every day. And this wall is like an indictment to her that she's not doing what God is asking her to do. And so eventually she gets a spiritual director who introduces her to a painter. And so he does, just broader. There's essentially two images, two divine mercy images, and so there's the first one, which is what this first painter did, and she's trying to. So he tells her to paint it, right? Jesus does, and so she just has to describe it to the painter, right? Because the painter hasn't seen it. And so when, she gets the painting back, she's like, well, this isn't what I saw at all. And she's actually bothered by it because she's like, Jesus was so beautiful. There was so much light emanating from him. This doesn't even begin to sort of capture it. And so, she has this, sort of deep relationship with Jesus. So she goes and complains to him, and he's like, no, it's okay. He's like, this is exactly what I wanted. He's like, I want a visual reminder of my mercy. And so, so she, that image begins to, first it ends up in a church, in Krakow, I believe, first. And people are just flocking to it.
Is the original image, that's still
I think it's
available
still there.
for veneration?
Yeah. So both of the, and then, a few years later, somebody makes a copy of it, and it's a little bit different. And that's why we see like two different images, both very much the same. But the point is that the veneration almost starts immediately because of the way it resonates, right?
So I know her feast day is October 5th, but Divine Mercy Sunday falls on the Sunday after Easter.
Yes.
And there's a tradition in the church where you start the Divine Mercy Novena on Good Friday and lead up to that. And it's so incredibly powerful. We've had Father Chris Alar on in the past where he's talked about just how efficacious this devotion is.
Yeah.
And, I want to mention, too, this diary, I said, had such a profound impact on me. I had it on my nightstand for a year, and it's such great material for meditation. It's simply written, but so incredibly beautiful. So I highly recommend that you pick that up again. It's Divine Mercy in My Soul. I know that I've seen it with other titles, too. Maybe? I don't know. It just seems like
so that that's one of the things that she's very faithful in the little things, and that's where the diary comes from, because she was basically overloading her spiritual director, and he's like, look,
how we're supposed to be doing it.
He's like, just write it down, and he's like, and then I'll read it when I have time. He's like, just come to confession, and then and so she was very faithful to what he told her to do, and then our Lord essentially came to her and confirmed that she was supposed to write it down. And one of the things that's, I guess tragic is that a demon had come to her and got her to burn her first version of it. He had tricked her into thinking that it was all sort of just like straw. And so, and she never really did. So we would probably have a lot more about her earlier years. Again, all in providence, though. We have what we have.
All in providence.
Yes.
How was her message received by the church at the time?
Yeah, I mean, initially there is, obviously a lot of, especially in Poland, because of what's going on around them. It's well received. The image is well received. What ends up not being so well received is the diary itself, and but she knew that. So she, in fact, in the diary, which she said it was going to be suppressed, which is sort of a sign of authenticity. And
kind of makes me think of, oh my gosh, True Devotion to Mary by St. Louis de Montfort. How that manuscript was
same sort
hidden.
of thing, yeah. And it, interestingly enough, it was because there was a bad translation. So it ended up in Rome, a bad Italian translation of it. So they had, not only suppressed the diary, but suppressed the devotion at first. And then a Polish cardinal named Karol Wojtyła, future John Paul II, who, was sort of a contemporary. They were in Krakow at the same time, obviously knew about the devotion, made sure that they cleaned up the translation. And then in 1977, he appealed back to the Vatican and said, look, that was a bad translation. Here's what it's supposed to be. And he had already sort of opened up her process of canonization about 10 years before that. So
how amazing.
That sort of connection, right? And he ends up being the Pope who canonizes her as the first saint of the new millennium.
So obviously, her virtues speak for themselves. Deep humility, obedient to Christ and what He is asking of her without hesitation. She's very determined. I love these qualities in her. And I couldn't help but think of Saint Joan of Arc in the midst of studying Saint Faustina and preparing for today. There's a lot of similarities with timing in the countries and, embracing the cross. Do you have anything else to add just to kind of paint a picture of her, Saint Faustina, and how she was open to what was called of her?
Yeah, the other thing, too, that maybe is easy to sort of overlook was her sort of dedicating herself to being like participating fully in God's mercy, in the sense of very often she would, she sort of had offered herself as a victim soul, and she would experience like, the turmoil that sinners sort of experience. And she would do that in order to, sort of merit the grace for the sinners, right? And so that, and then the other thing too that, she really came to sort of understand was the importance of praying for those who are dying. And that's where I think, the Chaplet of Divine Mercy is particularly powerful. A beautiful story of that is we were at the bedside of a woman who was dying, and she was pretty much out of it, like at that stage where, and we started praying the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, and all of a sudden she just perked up and prayed it with us, which is, there's a grace attached to that, right? And so, like, at the beginning I was, saying, like, how many souls have probably been saved by the Divine Mercy Chaplet.
My sweet Mama Ruth was on her deathbed, and my brother and I decided at the last minute to go see her, much to her chagrin, because she didn't want anybody there.
Yeah.
And I was heading into adoration to pray before my trip the next day and ran into a mutual friend and said, I don't know what to do. What should I take with me? I'm kind of last minute preparing for this. She said, here. And she pulled out the Divine Mercy Chaplet and she said, just take this with you. And same thing. She was not raised Catholic. She certainly had some affinity for the Catholic Church because of experiences that she'd had when she was a little girl. And wow, it was pretty incredible to be able to do that for her. So, I mean, and in the midst of these little moments where God is kind of directing the path too, I think is so awesome. All right. Anything else before we move on to our next saint?
No, I think let's move on.
Yeah. And the Divine Mercy Chaplet, all these prayers, you can certainly go to the Marian Fathers in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, who really, promulgate that devotion to Divine Mercy, and lots of information about St. Faustina. If you've not heard of this, your world is about to be rocked. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so October 9th, we celebrate the feast day of St. John Henry Newman. And for those that are not familiar with our newest doctor of the church, what would you say about his life, who he was, and why is he a saint?
Yeah, well, why is he a saint is a pretty complicated question, right? I mean, so if I answer that question very specifically, it was his passion for the truth.
Mm-hmm.
A beautiful sort of maybe just a beautiful witness to how truth wins out over prejudice, right? So he is, born in early 19th century London, very anti-Catholic culture. Family's not very religious. So eventually he makes his way to Oxford, where he's going to study to be an Anglican priest. Somehow feels this call to take a vow of celibacy, talk about providence, because he thought it was impossible to be married and be a pastor. He becomes this leading intellectual in England, especially with respect to sort of the Anglican Church. And he becomes probably the most staunch defender of evangelical Christianity in his day. And in fact, his conversion sort of rocks England. It's like almost, I don't think we necessarily grasp it. It was almost like if Billy Graham had converted to become Catholic.
Oh, okay.
He very famous, was sort of the evangelist of the day. So it's a big deal. But in the end, he shows how sort of truth wins out over prejudice, especially when it's coupled with humility.
I want to bring it back to home here in the Diocese of Raleigh, too. I think our beloved Monsignor Jeffrey Ingham had a strong devotion to St. John Henry Newman. And I have a couple of prayers in my monthly Magnificat that I transfer over every month that he had printed and put on a card with St. John Henry Newman's face on it. And I wonder, I don't know, do you know this, Rob, if when he had his sabbatical in England, if that's when he first encountered him? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Wow. And he could just spout, Monsignor Ingham could just spout some of the prayers.
The beauty with Newman, like his poetry is beautiful. And very I'm not the most I can sit down and read poetry kind of guy. I don't know if that's obvious even listening to me. But even his I get his poetry. And so Monsignor Ingham loved poetry.
Yes. The depth to it was incredible.
Yeah. And so that, not surprising. Newman was sort of the whole picture, right? He was this sort of Renaissance man who had just a tremendous amount of, intellectual gifts, but also just animated by charity. So all of
what
that.
A great combination.
Yeah.
And, I know that he underwent a major spiritual crisis leading to his conversion from Anglicanism to Catholicism in 1845. What was that?
Yeah. So he really, if you read his autobiography, he essentially says he has 3 conversions.
Oh, okay.
So the first is when he's 15. So he had, again, a well-educated teenager. He had sort of begun to read all the anti-religious tropes of the age. He's reading Thomas Paine, Voltaire, Hume, and he's decided that religion is just kind of, stupid, exactly. But then his dad loses his bank, and the family's very poor, and so he is left at school by himself. And he's left there with a professor who starts introducing him to Christian writings. And so he really has this grace of conversion, this first conversion at 15, where he just, God gave him this sort of singular grace where he was keenly aware that there was this intimate relationship between him and God. So he says, this is where my conversion starts. And then he has another conversion about 17 years later, when he is touring Rome or Italy specifically. And I think he's in Sicily at the time, and he ends up getting sick. And he spends kind of 11 days close to death. While he is suffering this, he has this experience of just this urgency, right? That he's kind of put himself in a position where it's all intellectual, and so he has this sort of urgency to fight that, and to declare war, what he calls in liberalism and religion, which is sort of this subjectivism of everybody can believe what they want to believe. And so from that, he forms what comes to become known as the Oxford movement. And what he's trying to do there is to protect the, Oxford from becoming liberalized, theologically, because Oxford was where they would school all the clergy. And then he has, ultimately his final conversion to the Catholic Church. I think it was in 1845. I think it was 44 at the time, and so that's when he, ultimately becomes, he comes into the church, and eventually he's ordained as a priest, and from there he's sort of the staunch defender of Catholicism.
Oh, so amazing! I keep thinking about the Hound of Heaven, and doesn't stop. He works through everybody. We just have to embrace it and respond. If you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. And today I'm speaking with Rob Agnelli about the lives of St. Faustina Kowalska, St. John Henry Newman, and St. John Paul the Great. And we are certainly grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College. Okay, so like I said before, feast day is October 9th. How can Catholics embrace him, get more familiar with him, and maybe, I don't know, draw inspiration from his life? What do you think?
Well, I mean, what I said earlier about that sort of passion for the truth, and letting the truth lead you.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. So, and it's very easy to say passion for the truth. We're following the truth. Patrick Madrid says this all the time when he's referring to old hairy legs, and I love that. I'm going to totally steal that. But old hairy legs likes to confuse us with what is truth and what isn't truth. So, I mean, I think, how do we get to the basis of truth first so that we can defend it properly?
Well, and this is how Newman got there, because ultimately truth is a person, the person of Jesus Christ.
I think
right?
You've said that to me before.
And so, so as he comes to know Jesus more and more deeply, it's easy for him to follow the truth, right?
Yes.
So that's the trick, right? The trick is, that the devil uses is to think, this is just a bunch of ideas, right? And this is one of the beautiful things about Newman. Is that what he did is he made all of those ideas real, in the sense of, like, if you read his sermons, almost every one of them will take some theological truth and then tell you, how does it make a difference in your life, right? And so we don't often grasp that, right? Like we can, believe something in the creed, we can say we believe it, but we don't necessarily grasp like how that changes your life, right? And so I think it's that, like, I think that passion for the truth starts with a love for Christ, who will lead you to all truth, right? By giving you the Holy Spirit in your heart. So I think it's that. I think if you go at it from an intellectual, I mean, there's a path there, but until you encounter the person of Jesus, it's just a theory or a worldview, right? And it's not a worldview.
From the head to the heart.
Yes.
Sometimes it's the longest distance. Okay, so obviously he had deep faith, seemed to be very humble. And I found, too, that he seemed to be very sensitive pastorally. So he would respond to people. Did you encounter any of that?
So, he was one of the things, I think this probably was what was sitting on him when he takes the vow of celibacy. What he would do often is, especially when he was, still an Anglican priest, which was virtually unheard of, he would go in and he'd be appointed pastor somewhere, and he'd visit everyone in his parish. And so he was, almost to a fault, attentive to what people needed, right? And this, I think, is why, which is, clearly one of his gifts, why, younger people flock to him, right? Because he was so attentive as a teacher. He would not just teach them, he would mentor them. And he often would sort of get in trouble for that, because they were like, look, you're just here to teach. What are you doing? And especially when he's sort of this closet Catholic, and he's teaching them things that are not Anglican anymore. So I think that was what sort of enabled him to capture the hearts of young people. And that made him sort of very dangerous to the culture.
Walking with them.
Yes.
And not just teaching down to them. There's a lot to be said in that statement, Rob, I think. And we need to walk with our young and mentor. And I think you do that very well, too.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. He obviously influenced modern Catholic education and thought. He was canonized by Pope Francis in 2019. Just one quick question about becoming a doctor of the church. Why? How does that happen? And why was he chosen?
Yeah, he just became doctor of the church on, I think, July 31st was when Pope Leo XIV named him doctor of the church, which is, again, sort of interesting because, Pope Leo XIV, I think, has sort of connected himself to Leo XIII. And so Leo XIII is the one who sort of, because Newman was getting, a lot of Catholics were, basically calling him a heretic. And so Leo XIII sort of redeemed him by making him a cardinal. And so it's interesting how Leo XIV now takes him and makes him a doctor of the church. I think what ultimately, what his sort of legacy and what's really important is probably, and I think in the announcement that when Leo XIV said this, it's his teachings on the development of doctrine that ultimately, I think, ends up being why he is so important today.
Okay, on the development of doctrine.
Yes.
Okay, in what way for those people?
Yeah, so the idea of development of doctrine, it's been there since the very beginning of the church, right?
It doesn't.
Yeah, so if you think about this, when there, just take any statement in Scripture, right? Like, then when you make a statement, I don't know, let's just start with outside of Scripture, like the sky is blue, right? There's 100 things that are implicit in that statement, right? Like if I say the sky is blue, you would say, you could say, okay, oh, well, that's why, water looks blue because it's reflecting the sky. Or you could say, oh, that must say something about the atmosphere because I know space is black or whatever,
the
right?
Connection.
Yeah. So you have all of these sort of, and that's exactly how like revelation is, right? Like God says something, but there's all kinds of things connected to it, right? And so what has to happen is, right, like over time, and this what he was saying is what you want is like revelation is living and active. So that means people are thinking about it, sort of like I was thinking about the sky is blue. And so what he's saying is essentially when ideas are active, people are all the time kind of looking at them and go, well, what does this imply? What does this imply? What is this? So there's this movement, throughout time of something implicit becoming more and more explicit, right? And so what he gives us, and this is why it's really important, and what he gives us first is sort of rules for going, okay, this movement from implicit to explicit is absolutely necessary, right? Because otherwise Scripture, tradition become a dead letter, right? Because you just have these God facts, which is one of the things that sort of Protestantism sort of suffers from, right? And that's what he found, right? Like, as he said, to be steeped in history is cease to be Protestant. And what he meant by that is if you look historically, you can't just take the Bible and go, oh, there's all these God facts in here and then not make connections to it, right? And so first thing he says is, okay, that's necessary because it's living and active. And of course, we're going to move from implicit to explicit. But the other thing too, which is actually pretty cool about it, is he says, well, if that's true, and it is, then there has to be someone to guard it, right? And so then he sort of walks himself into an argument for the necessity of an authoritative church. And so it's this beautiful sort of way to like defend tradition, knock down sola scriptura, and just to defend the authority of the church, right? Because he's like, if, revelation given but not protected isn't revelation. So, and just this, how it is not just, we're not just trying to push back heretics, which that's part of what we're trying to do, but there's also this sort of growth in our understanding, which enables us to know the person of Jesus even better, right?
Yeah.
And so this is why I think for our time, especially when we sort of live in this, ecumenical time and pluralistic time, I think that doctrine to grasp that doctrine is a really powerful sort of way to see the truth of the Catholic Church. And so I think that's in that way he is, definitely a sort of a teacher for our time.
Wow. And how providential that he was chosen as a doctor of the church recently. And I don't know how many times I've heard with intellectuals that were raised Protestant, and when they started doing research on their own and they ended up, somebody suggested, check out the church fathers.
Yeah,
and
that's what happened to him. That's what happened to him. He
leads him home.
He went back to like the Monophysite heresy and found out that, that people left the church because of the emperor. And he's like, wait, in England, we left the church because of the king. That makes us schismatics. And, and then suddenly he's like, I can't do this anymore.
And how many people do not know that the Church of England was started?
Yeah, it's a strange way to sort of, to go, wow, I'm in the schismatic church.
And if you don't know, if you're tuning in and you don't know why the Church of England was created, check it out and let us know. All right, so we go from St. John Henry Newman on October 9th to our much beloved St. John Paul II, St. John Paul the Great on October 22nd. And wow, it's so great to be Catholic and to live during this time. He's known and loved by many. I've heard several adults our age, a little bit younger, that were able to go to the World Youth Day with him in Denver, and how it impacted them. And they were one of thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the stadium there. What do you think made him so universally admired, Rob?
I think it was his love for the human person.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can put it.
He didn't make any distinctions with the people that he encountered.
No, he would treat people as if they were the only people in the world.
Yeah, that's...
He operated on his own time. Like, he used to drive him crazy because he would spend as much time as he wanted to with someone. Even just, as a young priest, him taking, young couples out and, teaching them about marriage, and the way he would, even his nickname, right? He had them call him Uncle. He's just very attentive, and very fatherly, in the sense of, he never sort of gave up the idea of what a priest was. And I think, just a perfect model for fathers in general, too. Fathers,
priests.
Yeah.
Yeah. Share some highlights about his youth in Poland and how that shaped.
Yeah, I mean, similar to St. Faustina, he's about 15 years younger than her. So same sort of thing. Living through World War II, he grows up in Wadowice, which is about 30 miles from Krakow, in 1920. He lives with his parents, his brother. He had a sister who died. They're not really sure when she died, but it's sometime before he was born. So his mother dies when he's at a very young age, when he's 8. And so he's left with his father and his older brother. And then eventually, when he's 11, his older brother dies. He was a doctor, and he died, I think, from scarlet fever. And so now he's sort of left with his father. And his father has this tremendous sort of effect on him. He talks about, just how holy his father was. And so he and his father moved to Krakow so that he can go to the university there. And that's about the time when the Nazis come in. And so now he has to sort of go to the university in secret. He ends up, going to the seminary in secret. He works in a quarry to sort of hide what he's doing. He joins a rhapsodic theater, which at the time would have been like a punishable offense. So he risks his life just for theater. So eventually he makes his way to the cathedral, and he meets the sort of new father figure, which is Cardinal Sapieha. He's eventually ordained. And all of this again going on while they're being occupied, either first by the Nazis and then by the Russians.
Yeah, communist regimes.
Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible time. And there's a really good movie out about him. And there's a couple of scenes that really have embedded themselves in my brain. One is of his dad on the floor kneeling as he comes home late from his job, working, I guess, in the quarry. And so you talk about his father's devotion, and, as parents, sometimes we just discount and don't even pay attention to our own devotions and how effective they are on our children. They are watching, even if we don't think that they are. And what was the other part? Just running in the streets when he was going to the seminary in secret. There were some scenes from that, how he witnessed some of his friends being killed in the street. And he just talk about his pontificate, why it was so important for our church during the time that he was.
So he, historically, is, I think it's the third longest reigning pope, 26 years. So it's like St. Peter, Pius IX. So obviously he was there for a long time. And so, we could probably spend hours with his accomplishments. But I think I would go back to just what we talked about at the beginning of like his insistence on the dignity of the human person, right? So that he, here's where I think like long term, and I think where he will most likely be sort of, known, and it will be known for his personalism, which is this sort of where he maps like our experiences back onto objective truths, because, our culture is, for the gospel to sort of penetrate our culture, it has to resonate with people's experiences now. And so he found ways to make things resonate with people's experiences, right? Whether it be, his teachings with theology of the body, just how that transforms relationships and marriages and protects people from transgenderism, like lets us know what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, as a bodily reality, not just a spiritual reality. All of that, his teachings on work, the culture of life, all of that. I think that will be where he will, sort of most historically leave the imprint on the church.
Gosh, he authored so many key encyclicals, and the theology of the body. And I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with that, pick it up. There's a lot of summaries that are out there that are that you can get through maybe the USCCB or other reputable websites to really dive into these encyclicals and really learn a lot. They're very, very profound. So.
Yeah, and then of course just the way he fought communism. Mm-hmm. Right? He was just the bane of their existence, and ultimately probably played the key role in the fall of the Berlin Wall.
So incredible. All right. So personal virtues that stood out in his life: courage, compassion, intellectual depth. What else would you add to that? I mean,
to me, I think what's most profound about him is just his reliance, not even reliance, his awareness of providence, and how he submitted himself to providence. Like you already talked about with that movie, like all these little things that just always kind of fell in place for him, right? Like just. And, it would be touch and go. It would be, so many times, like at one of the times, I think they were coming to get the seminarians, and he was in a basement, and he prayed to the Blessed Mother that, she hide him, and they didn't come in the basement. They cleaned out the house, but didn't come in the basement. And so, he was very clear, I think, that providence, like, was his way of sort of obeying God, right? Because he could see the hand of providence, and that makes sense. Like he was, when his father died, he was completely alone, and that would have crushed other people, right? But he had this insistence that God was doing something, and so that I think, whatever that virtue is that causes, I guess it would be faith, that causes you to just have this complete and total reliance on providence. I mean, that's where he's such a great model for us.
I think you do that too, Rob. You accept.
I appreciate that.
Suffering. I remember some parts too with some things that I read about him, and in that movie as well. Towards the end of his life, he struggled extensively with Parkinson's, and he was incredibly frustrated at one point, and just, why am I here? I don't need, So he was obviously very human too. How did he handle it? What do you think?
So what I think he calls it, I think it was in 1994, he broke his hip. So he fell in the bathroom and he broke his hip. And from that point forward, he kind of walked with a limp, and he was a pretty active guy. So it was, like you said, like kind of a struggle. And so at a Wednesday audience, after he gets out of the hospital, he goes out in just a very honest way. He's like, I meditated on all of this while I was in the hospital. And I came to understand that in order to lead the church in, the 21st century, I have to lead it by suffering. And so, he thought, well, I led it by teaching, I led it by, sort of making sure that, the church has its bishops, and, but he thought at the end that the Pope has to suffer. And there, again, that's the hand of providence, right? So at the time, he even said, he's like, this is the year of the family. Families are under attack. The Pope has to suffer for families. And so he had this sort of keen awareness, again, going back to the beginning of like what we talked about with Poland just in general. He knew the value of the cross, right? And he had also seen in his life, almost at every key juncture of his life, one of his friends suffered for him. And it was very, very, very strange. So like he had this mentor, his name was Jan Tyranowski, who the minute that John Paul entered the seminary, he got sick. And he told John Paul, he's like, I'm offering my sufferings for your formation. And then Cardinal Wyszynski, who was another adopted father to him, when John Paul II gets shot, he's in the hospital dying. And Wyszynski says the same thing. He says, I'm offering this for your... So he saw this, right? He saw all of these people who suffered for him. And so he knew that like his role, and then, in meditating on that, taught the whole church like the value of suffering. And, which is really an important lesson.
Gosh, what a great message in that too. To tell someone specifically that you're offering your own suffering for them. I've never really thought about doing that way. So that's a great reminder. And, obviously another virtue that he had was forgiveness and forgiving his would-be assassin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's an incredible picture of him visiting him in prison and telling him that he forgave him. So another powerful example of someone who is forgiving from the world stage, which I think is an important reminder for us as well. So, okay, as we wrap this up, Rob, because we can go on and on and on for hours on these incredible saints, what's one lesson from St. John Paul the Great that you believe the church and the world needs to hear today? What do you think?
So one of the things that he wrote several books, sort of later in his pontificate, kind of looking back over his life and over his priesthood. And one of the things he admitted, which I thought was really, really powerful, was he, at a very young age, was sort of embarrassed to be around weak and sick people. I think if all of us sort of examine our hearts, we find that, right? Because, and he says it because he felt like he had nothing to offer them, right? And we all feel that, right? We feel we're in the face of someone suffering, we have nothing to offer them. And so there's almost like a secondhand embarrassment attached to it. And he said at one time he sort of came to realize that actually he did have something to offer them. And that was that he could reveal like their role, like to your point about suffering, right? Their role in the drama of human redemption, right? How God is close to the brokenhearted and how God uses those people to distribute graces through him, like through their suffering, right? So that when they unite themselves with Christ, like Christ, he doesn't do it all by himself, right? He sort of recruits us, to share and it's almost like co-redeemers in a certain sense, right? And so, he really came to understand that he could help people to take their suffering and actually, unite it to Christ and change the world, right?
Wow. Oh my gosh. As we've heard, the lives of St. Faustina, St. John Henry Newman, and St. John Paul the Great remind us that holiness takes many forms, from mystical visions to intellectual pursuit, from papal leadership to quiet obedience. Each of them respond to God's call in their own time and place. And that same call echoes in our lives today. We're all called to be saints, not perfect, but faithful. So as we honor these saints of October, let's ask for their intercession. May we too live with trust like St. Faustina, seek truth like St. John Henry Newman, and love boldly like St. John Paul the Great, becoming by God's grace saints in the making. Thank you so much for joining me on Saints in the Making. Until next time, let's keep each other in prayer. Special thank you to Rob. Rob, thanks again. Your information is incredible. You shared such beautiful insights with us today. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on this journey. If you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on past conversations filled with inspiration and hope, you can find them all at divinemercyradio.org. Just click on local shows. And don't forget, you can take FaithWorks with you wherever you go. Just download the free Divine Mercy Radio app from your app store. Simply search Divine Mercy Radio and see, and you're all set to listen anytime, anywhere. Until next time, keep living your faith boldly because faith works. God bless.